you type in the word Toyota in Japanese on the YouTube search engine right now, most of the searches are going to come out like this. I'll briefly translate the video titles in English. Akio Toyota's honest words after frauds were revealed. Toyota Industries also violates engine regulations to be supplied for Toyota vehicles. Shipment of 10 Toyota models suspended. Toyota chairman says he's prepared to rebuild the company after a series of apologies on company fraud. Toyota Industries holds press conference regarding engine fraud. So yeah, the series of fraud scandals regarding the Toyota Group are currently a really big deal in Japan right now. And I know that a video covering the corporate side of Japan may not be as juicy of a topic, thus probably the reason why I see no Japan-based YouTuber talking about this. But I hope you stay for this video. As if you're really interested in understanding Japan, the current Toyota Group fraud cases can be your lens to understanding two very important aspects about the nation's work culture. The type of culture in many ways that has heavily contributed in building Japan to be the type of country that it is now, both the good and the bad. So without further ado, let us dive into today's video. Let's go back to around a year from now. In April 2023, Daihatsu Motor Company, a 100% subsidiary of Toyota, had a whistleblower inside the company who stated that the company rigged the results of their side collision safety tests. 88,000 cars that were sold not under the Daihatsu brand, but the Toyota brand. So an external investigation team began to investigate on this in attempts to find the truth to this issue. And after a few months of extensive investigation, it was indeed found that fraud has been committed by the Toyota subsidiary. Now, what they actually did was, if you describe it nicely, quite silly, but if you describe it from the perspective of the potential buyers of these cars, absolutely unacceptable. To minimize the chances of the occupant getting injured when the door interior breaks with sharp edges, they modified the safety tested cars with a quote-unquote notch that greatly minimizes the risk of the occupant getting injured. But then, such a risk-reducing notch that allowed the cars to test well on the side collision safety tests were not a part of the vehicles that were actually produced for sale. So when the external investigation team asked the executives at Toyota what this was all about, Toyota basically replied with a, "What? We are not responsible for this. This was all done by our unscrupulous subsidiaries over at Daihatsu." Now, this will be fair enough of a statement if Daihatsu was A. Not a wholly owned 100% subsidiary of Toyota, but a partly owned subsidiary. B. These fraudulent cars were solely made for the Daihatsu brand and not the Toyota brand ones. But neither was the case. And in addition to that, this was not the first instance of a Toyota subsidiary recently being found with fraud. In 2022, Hino, Toyota's truck-making subsidiary, was found with rigging emissions data for 20-something years and selling more than 560,000 related trucks during this time span. The executives at Toyota once again apologized and how they, as the parent company of Hino Motors, feel sorry for what happened and how they will now look after Hino more closely. And we live in a world where perception is everything. So although Daihatsu is literally a 100% subsidiary of Toyota and was factually committing fraud by manufacturing vehicles to be sold mostly as Toyota vehicles and not Daihatsu vehicles, and thus most often following deadline schedules ultimately mandated by the high-ups at Toyota themselves, at the end of the day, they still have the name Daihatsu at the front, and not Toyota. And the same obviously applies with Hino. So from the perception sense, it was viable for Toyota to continue to still describe the fraud scandals in the lines of "they are responsible" rather than "we are responsible." But then, yet another fraud was recently revealed from one of the Toyota subsidiaries, and this time it had the word Toyota inside the company name. Just a few weeks ago, Toyota Industries, the very original Toyota Corporation in which the current Toyota Motor Corporation has developed from in the first place, was caught with having committed a series of fraudulent vehicle performance tests. They manipulated data over the exhaust gas tests for 6 forklift engines, as well as manipulating data over the performance tests for 3 automobile engines. So when all of this was revealed regarding Toyota Industries, it has now become harder for the people at Toyota Motors to use the "they did it, not us" argument. Again, with the subsidiary that has committed fraud being the very original foundational company in which Toyota Motors has eventually branched out from when looking back at the company's history. So the CEO of Toyota Motors, Akio Toyoda, said how he is sorry for what they have done and will lead the transformation of how things operate at Toyota Industries himself. Now, such a stance from the CEO on the outside seems reasonable. And I actually do have a decent level of respect for the CEO Akio Toyoda, and believe that the culture and organizational norms currently existing in the Toyoda Group is at fault, and don't think that it is right to put the entire blame on the CEO. He actually does look like an individual with a good heart who wishes to do good for the company. But with that said, if you have lived decade-plus years in Japan as I have, like, such negative aspects about the nation's work culture should be the least of your worries if you just live, or is just physically present in the country as a tourist, English teacher, or a content creator or something, but experience Japan to the core of your being as I have, whether it be rubbing shoulders with most likely at least one future Prime Minister of Japan in the next 60 years or so, while I was studying at Waseda's Department of Political Science and Economics, rubbing shoulders with the working class people of Japan by working construction jobs underground at Tokyo Metro subway after the midnight hours when the trains have stopped as a broke college student on a government scholarship just trying to get by until I graduate, or rubbing shoulders with the middle class salarymen of Japan working for a Japanese company post-graduation. I know that there's a clear pattern here with Toyoda Group's apologies regarding the series of the fraud cases that you prominently see in all group settings in Japan. They never use the word responsible, and there is always that tone of a parent saying we'll look after them properly, not us, them. When their subsidiary Hino gets caught with fraud, it is, we are sorry for what Hino has done. We'll have a closer eye on them from now. When their 100% subsidiary Daihatsu gets caught with fraud, taking Toyota's orders regarding the testing deadline schedule, and supplying car parts that were not used in the Daihatsu vehicles, but mostly Toyota vehicles, it is once again we are sorry for what they have done. We'll look after them better from now. When their original company Toyota Industries gets caught with data manipulation fraud over diesel engine inspections, it is still we are sorry for what they have done. We will now look more carefully at what they do and lead the group's transformation. And what we observe here is not at all something that happens only at Toyota by all means in Japan. What we are witnessing is the culture of responsibility avoidance that's prevalent in the Japanese work culture, as well as group settings in Japan in general. While I owe my life to Japan and respect so many aspects of the nation's culture, if I could count perhaps the one thing that I desperately wanted to happen in my decade-plus years of living in the country, it is my wish to hear just a clean, "I'm sorry, I screwed up, let's fix this." Let's not get one thing wrong, by the way. The people in Japan still do apologize, quite often actually, but it is always in the lines of, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience caused by what happened that was out of my control. I'm sorry for the inconvenience caused to you because of what they did." Never "I'm sorry for what I have done. Let's make this right." We are all human beings. We all make mistakes. But in Japan, where perfectionism runs supreme, admitting a mistake and saying that I or we were responsible for a fault is basically the equivalent of a death sentence. So we cannot just blame the people in Japan for the practice of responsibility avoidance in work settings, as it is quite ingrained as a part of their subconscious as a literal survival instinct. So when someone screws something up, all I want to hear is a clean, "Oh, my bad, let's fix this," and we move on. But no, not like sometimes, or most times, every single time. "Oh, I was not responsible for this. I just followed orders from that department. They are actually responsible." Then you go to that department and it is, "Oh no, we just did as told by that layer of the admin. They made the decision." And then you go all the way up the ladder of where the responsibility avoidance takes you, and the final person says, "Oh no, I'm not responsible. I just followed the manual. And they over there, they made the manual. They are responsible." And then you go to the people who made the manual. Then it's, "Oh no, we made the manual based on what they told us to put in the manual. They are responsible." And kind of like when you have a little pebble inside your shoes, you can still walk for around 200 meters or so. But then it's not that you get used to the pebble, but the opposite happens of how you just get to a point where the discomfort from the pebble catches up, and afterwards, that discomfort that you thought was quite bearable for the first 200 meters becomes a full-on agonizing pain burning the bottom of your feet, and now you just cannot walk anymore. The years of not hearing a proper apology, but the, "Oh no, I'm not responsible for this. It was them." It really does catch up to you. And in essence, this is exactly the situation with Toyota right now. I truly believe that if Toyota finally used the word "we" instead of "they," the series of fraud scandals that have been discovered within the Toyota Group on a consistent basis in the recent years, whether it be the fraudulent data manipulation by the truck-making subsidiary Hino in 2022, the safety test rigging by the 100% subsidiary Daihatsu in 2023, or the vehicle performance test data manipulation by their root company Toyota Industries in 2024 may not have occurred, as well as similar manipulation and fraud inside the Toyota Group much less likely to happen in the future. With that said, some defendants of Toyota may say, Why should Toyota use the word we instead of they in their apologies? After all, Daihatsu, Hino, and Toyota Industries are all technically subsidiaries of Toyota and not actually Toyota themselves. Well, let us explain. First, when the external investigation team that discovered the fraud committed by Toyota Industries were asked on what compelled the people at Toyota Industries to commit such data manipulation, they gave the two reasons of irrational development schedule mandated by the parent company Toyota Motors in combination with lack of respect towards compliance. Now, let us think. What would objectively happen in a subordinate company that is mandated with a cannot be questioned, impossible development deadline by the godlike parent company, while at the same time, the subordinate company lacks the sense of need to adhere to compliance? It does not take a rocket scientist to know that the answer to this question is reading the data and match the deadline as dictated by the parent company, whether it goes against compliance or not. The same is basically what the external investigation team that uncovered Daihatsu's safety test rigging stated as well, with prioritization on quick development, as well as tight schedules for certification tests, having said to heavily contribute to the testing fraud scandal. This leads to my next point regarding Japan's questionable work culture, or a cultural norm that has to be followed in a group setting in general, and that is the concept of hierarchy is everything. To elaborate, if you know anything about the corporate scene in Japan, you'll know that for these subsidiaries under the Toyota Group, the orders from the high-ups of the main Toyota Corporation itself are basically the equivalent to orders from God. Let's say that the executives at the main Toyota Motors orders an unreasonable testing schedule to Toyota Industries to test their diesel engines. Do we really think that the subordinates at Toyota Industries can walk up to the people at the almighty main Toyota headquarters in Nagoya and say that, hey, this delivery schedule is way too unrealistic, give us another 6 months to do the tests properly? For the employee who says this, it is essentially the same as him saying with his own mouth that he wants to be fired.
Bad boy, you naughty boy.
Or be permanently ostracized within the company and receive the infamous Murahachibu treatment that will never allow him to take a single step closer to promotion in his entire life. So rather than stepping up, they would rather just rig the test results as done by Daihatsu, Hino, and Toyota Industries to follow the deadline mandated by the omnipotent authority above. And the scary part is, such rigging and quote-unquote data touch-ups may not be something that is only happening at Toyota. To elaborate, now we really have to get into the intricacies of the Japanese economic and political scene to be able to explain this in depth, but just to put it shortly, if you observe the historical political scene in Japan, there is one particular city in the country in which the current ruling party of Japan, that is the Liberal Democratic Party, does not like. And that is the city of Nagoya, with the region's history of left-wing tendency and prevalence of opposition parties to the LDP. And Toyota basically represents Nagoya, and is thus not particularly pro-current administration either. So some in Japan criticize certain government ministries for being too harsh only towards Toyota by sending these ministry-designated external investigation teams and scrutinizing their group and their subsidiaries to a much harsher level to that of other Japanese motor groups such as Nissan. And with Japan's questionable work culture of responsibility avoidance and hierarchy above all else, most likely existing in other large Japanese corporations as well, that does not receive the type of intense government scrutiny in which Toyota has historically been prone to receiving, we should be the least surprised if similar fraud scandals to the type of ones that have stormed the Toyota Group recently with Hino in 2022, Daihatsu in 2023, and now Toyota Industries in 2024, gets revealed in other large Japanese corporations as well.